and welcome to Manage Self, Lead Others podcast. My name is Pip Savaris, and today we're going to be talking about psychological safety with the host of the podcast, Nina Sunday.
Hi, Pip, and thanks for being with us today. And I'm looking forward to the topic about leading people and making sure there's psychological safety.
So let's get started. My first question is, what is psychological safety?
Well, when we're talking about psychological safety, when I talk about psychological safety, I'm not really talking about the two negative ends of the continuum, if you like, and the far end is bullying, and the further along is mental health. I'm really talking about a very subtle behavior that kind of swamps people in the sense that they don't feel they can have candor, they can't ask questions, they can't contribute ideas, and it could be that maybe they've got a micromanaging manager, or maybe they've even got a bullying manager, that they just feel that if I say something, it's going to turn around and bite me down the track. So it's best if I just keep my head down and say nothing. And that is the absolute antithesis of teamwork and effectiveness. And it seems to be rife in the workplace.
It's so important that people know the definition of psychological safety. So, we can understand when it exists, I guess, what are the benefits of that then?
Well, if I can just backtrack a little to how the term psychological safety came up. A Harvard professor coined the term in the very late 90s in one of her books. And that kind of got the ball rolling. Then the next study that was embarked upon was by the Google company, and they named it Project Aristotle. They have a very robust PeopleLab there. And of course, they've got access to all the information in the world. They also had access to over 100 of their own teams, and they started looking at what attributes or qualities contributed to effective teamwork. And what is it about the manager? What are the attributes of a manager that contributed to engagement and effectiveness? So they started off at surface level qualities, such as perhaps the education level of the manager. Was a manager that had an MBA or management qualifications able to lead their teams better than perhaps a manager that came up through the ranks, was more of an IT engineer. So they looked at that difference. That didn't seem to yield any data. Then they started looking at maybe their leadership style, how meetings were carried out. Like some meetings, the manager plays a very strong directive role and does most of the talking and only occasionally invites comments, as opposed to a more ad hoc, freewheeling style where people are free to interrupt each other. So they did look at those two styles. That did yield some data. They also looked at things like similar interests, or even socializing outside of work together, because sometimes there has been the opinion that the team that plays together stays together. But that didn't seem to stand up to scrutiny when they looked at it. It didn't seem to create such a difference. So none of those really came up with any distinctive conclusions. So then they started looking at some of the unconscious behaviours and norms and expectations around behaviours and practices. And they started to then realise that some groups were more socially sensitive to each other than others. So, for example, some people would be able to see that someone was a bit quiet, or perhaps even maybe a little bit upset, and instead of just ignoring it and going, well, they're just a work colleague, I won't investigate, they'd actually ask, are you okay? Is anything wrong? And it could be that actually going through a bit of a issue, either at home, maybe aged parents, maybe adolescent teenagers, maybe they have to move house, maybe they're going through a marriage breakup. Anything could be happening. And unless the team is able to somewhat support, we're not talking about prying or getting too involved, but be able to support and be aware that that's what's happening, it seems to take a bit of that weight off the shoulder of the person that's suffering from that issue. So socially sensitive means picking up the non-verbal cues, if you like. So it could be facial expression. It could be whether they're not smiling today, whereas most days they're a smiling sort of personality, or being a bit short or impatient. So they're picking up on different behaviours, or even difference in skin colour and tone, and how they're holding their face and their body language. Those are subtle cues that only teams with high emotional intelligence, or individuals with high emotional intelligence, will pick up, because emotional intelligence is all about being able to be reflective on what you say and also people's responses to what you say. So social sensitivity seemed to become one of the distinctive attributes of an effective team.
Yeah.
Then there was a second attribute, and it had to do with behaviour in team meetings. And it would appear that it's very common in teams, and I suspect our listeners will be able to identify with this. In teams, there tend to be the verbal fast talkers that seem to express their opinions with absolute confidence. Nothing can stop them. And what happens is the more reflective, introvert members of the team might become so swamped that they actually don't share what they think. So, in fact, I've been in a group meeting where I heard a young man in his early 20s say, "Oh yes, when I'm in meetings, when people sort of say their opinion really quickly and really confidently, I tend to not say anything, because I think, well, they're so passionate about their opinion, they must be right." So people second guess themselves, and often that's where the insight and the wisdom comes from.
In meetings, it's very important to be vocal if you have something to say, because then it can stew over and you could talk about it with the colleagues, but not the people who can actually make change. So it's very important.
What you're describing there is a very insidious, toxic behaviour. Some people call it white anting, but when people say something negative away from the eyes and ears of their supervisors, they're actually creating internal politics. They're creating negativity. And look, one of the reasons I'm focusing on this is when I had a team of 8 to 10 people, I didn't know this stuff. I didn't understand that focusing on culture meant that led to profitability. I thought the profitability came from focusing on results. And so when we engaged a management consultant to do what's called a 360-degree feedback,
Yes.
when he revealed the results to me, he said, his comment was, "These are comments that people say, well, Nina has meetings with us, but she doesn't have meetings one-on-one with us. And so I've never really been game to say this." And then they'll say what they really think to him. So he revealed to me what they really thought. And that was a big eye-opener, and it made me change my ways. We're talking 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That management consultant changed my perception of, I thought culture was about doing things together, socializing, celebrating birthdays, celebrating Christmas together with a lunch. I thought that was culture. But of course, I'd come from a television channel where that was what the culture was. So I was really, whispered down the lane. I was only doing what I'd been taught when I was with a really big bureaucracy. But they didn't really, at that time anyway, perhaps it's improved now, they didn't have a best practice culture. They had people were surface level, polite and operating, but there was a lot of negativity that was expressed behind the supervisors, behind the managers, behind the leaders' backs. And leaders need to know what's truly happening. And here's my biggest tip on how to encourage psychological safety. I use this in team meetings. Can you guess what this is?
The talking stick.
Yeah. Well, you know me, you know it's a talking stick. This is just a stick. Look, a talking stick can be anything.
Yeah.
I'll tell you where I got this idea. Look, I won't tell you where I got the idea. Was actually from some personal development workshops where they would hand the stick and the person who had the stick would speak for 2 minutes uninterrupted and no one could say anything. That was their moment. And of course, if you ever read Lord of the Flies, the novel by William Golding, they in that particular culture that they created, the boys who were shipwrecked, they had the conch shell, and whoever held the conch had the right of interrupted opinion expressing. But recently, a couple of years ago in the United States, when the United States Senate had an impasse between the Democrats and the Republicans, US Senator Susan Collins, she'd been given a talking stick from a native culture in Africa, and it had beautifully beaded and was very colourful. And she used this in meetings to free up conversation and to allow everybody to say what they think. And what's curious, the very first time I brought it out into a workshop, because we were doing a workshop on positive workplace culture, in a team that the manager who engaged me said, there's a lot of these problems that I've been explaining. The people that we want to hear from are zipping their lips in workshops. There is a bit of a bully manager that kind of makes people fearful to say what they think. I'm trying to open things up, but I have to work with other managers as well. And when I handed round the talking stick, people held it as if it was a microphone, and it freed them up. And everybody had 2 minutes, and it worked really well. So that is a tool that I can recommend that managers might want to try and give it a go. It's conversational equality is the second attribute that the Google research of Project Aristotle discovered.
Back on the point where you were talking about one-on-ones, the importance of one-on-ones is literally so important to make sure that everyone's on track, everyone feels good and confident, because that then cultivates even more psychological safety within the workplace.
And
this episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
I feel confident to talk about it now because I made the mistake of not understanding the importance of one-on-ones, but I've learned from my mistake. And it's also about making time, because making time for a one-on-one and doing them frequently. See, you could call a performance review that happens every quarter a one-on-one. Yes, it is, but it's generally accusatory, perhaps with a bit of blame, where the manager has kept a tally of all the misdemeanors and then all in one go says, you did this, you did this, you did this. And that's a performance review gone wrong. Yes. And what's now becoming best practice is scrapping performance reviews, having regular one-on-ones, because fast feedback is really important. You give feedback the minute, as soon as you observe the behaviour you want to shift. Don't collate a little list that you then swamp people with, that people walk out of the meeting feeling like they've been torn to shreds.
Yeah.
See, the days of the bully manager are numbered.
Yes, definitely.
And what's coming through is that organizations have to walk their talk when it comes to overarching purpose. And the organizations that focus on purpose and meaning, both for the wider community and for team engagement, profitability follows. Look after the purpose and profitability follows. Look after culture, profitability and results follow.
Exactly.
And I learned by my mistake. I've shifted my ways and I've never been happier. I've never been happier with my team, and I feel confident my team is happier with me. And I invite candor. I invite people to ask questions.
I think it's super important with that as well to be consistent with these things, because work can sometimes get in the way, but having the consistent one-on-ones and meetings, but people have a bit of routine and schedule so that they know that, okay, all good, I've got the one-on-one that I can talk to them about this, that, and whatever. So I think that's really important as well.
And there's more than one expert in leadership talks about the importance of starting the day with a 10-minute, 20-minute huddle or scrum or whatever you want to call it. I remember I was needed to get an item from the Apple store before I set up for a workshop. So I was there at 10 to 9, ready for the start. And while I was standing waiting for the doors to open, it was very interesting to see all the different huddles from all the small groups. Because it was in Sydney, the retail store is full of glass. The front facade is glass, so you can see right in. And there they were having their 10-minute huddle, and they sort of finish with some sort of physical, ritualistic, hands up in the air or something, just to indicate that was the end. And of course, what's important is that sense of belonging. So by starting the meeting, even if it's one-on-one, I start the meeting at a conference table where we talk about the priorities of the day. And as a manager, perhaps you are aware of have a bigger picture awareness of the priorities, because of course team members might choose to do tasks in their order of preference, but perhaps shifting them to order of priority. But unless you communicate that priority, they won't know exactly. They're not mind readers. They won't know what's in your head. But it does cultivate a good relationship. Yeah.
So one of my last questions is about Patrick Lencioni. So he talks about the fear of conflict as being one of like the dysfunctions of a team. But I think you briefly mentioned it, that, is it good to avoid conflict? Is it not good?
Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between trust and psychological safety. And the thing about trust is it can be superficial in that you don't want to say something at a meeting. You don't want to say what you really think for fear that you will be disliked. In fact, I had that experience yesterday. We had a end of year conversation. I'm the outgoing president of professional speakers for this year. And all the presidents were summing up. We had a 4-minute sum up of what we did this year. And I noticed the two presidents before me, it was 2 lots of 4-minute good news stories. And I went, I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm going to say we did this, and I did this. But remember, this is COVID year.
Yeah.
It was a difficult year. And I decided, and this actually goes against my personal grain, because being a high I in DISC influencing, I usually seek people's approval, and I don't like to be disliked. But I've just learned that it's important to tell the truth, more important to tell the truth than to be liked or to be approved. And I decided to state what I thought was a home truth. And guess what? When we did a process at the end of the day, we had to talk about what's working, what would you like to see, what's not working, and what would you like to see happen differently. The ripple effect meant that because I told the truth, and this was all done as an anonymous Google Doc. That was fabulous. Yes. We all had anonymous names, anonymous squirrel, anonymous crow. It was fabulous. Whoever set up the Google Doc meant that we could say what we think and no one knew what it was. And then we could vote on our top 3 or our top 5 priorities. That was such a superb exercise. And I could see the ripple effect of what my home truth had been appeared, not in what I wrote, but what other people wrote. I went, well, that's good, because we needed to address a negative. And look, with any team, it's always constant correction. It's not perfect all the time. And new issues come up. So we have to deal with them as they come up. So it's about learning from your mistakes. It's about reading the material. If you look up Project Aristotle on Google, there's articles on it, and I just am a great believer in just keep inputting. Start listening to other podcasts on leadership and management, and just get smart. Just get smarter.
Thank you, Nina. That's all for today. Unless you had anything else to add about psychological safety. I know I've learned a lot.
Well, I usually build this topic into another overarching topic that I call the 8 good behaviours of a manager, because that particular title of a workshop gives people the opportunity to focus on what are the good behaviours, but at the same time, the flip side is what are the poor behaviours that we need to avoid. One of the companies that I've worked with that I believe expresses best practice and has won awards for being an employer of choice. I did a productivity session with them, and one of the managers in one of the breaks was talking about, all the managers have to fit in, we all have to fit in all our one-on-ones every month, and in fact we try and do it every fortnight. I said, how many individual contributors do you look after? And he said, I've got about 15. And I said, well, I have to try and fit in one-on-one appointment every 2 weeks. So I find that is my true job, but I do find that the results in terms of effectiveness does speak for itself. So companies are doing it. The world is moving slowly towards a better best practice, and if you can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem, it creates a wonderful ripple effect.
Yes, I definitely agree with that.
Thanks for your insightful questions today, Pip, and it was fun talking with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina, and thank you everyone for listening to Manage Self and Lead Others.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.